Hi, everyone. Stewart Gandolf here again with another podcast. And today, in my series of sort of greatest hits in healthcare, Kris Baird is somebody I've known a long time. Kris is one of the leaders in the space, particularly on the hospital side, doing a lot with patient experience, leadership, phones, quality, lots of different things. First of all, welcome, Kris.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yes, and you sound good too as well. So your mic is working. That's great. Always good on a podcast. So I wanted to ask you to start off by just, I've known you forever, and certainly people that have been following healthcare, you're pretty well known. But for those people who don't know you, tell a little bit about your company and your background and the kinds of things you do every day. Then we'll focus on the specific topic.
Yeah, thank you. So my background is clinical. I started as a registered nurse and I transitioned later in my career to being in charge of marketing and business development. And for a lot of people, it seems like, wow, that's quite a jump. It really wasn't for me. I've always been entrepreneurial. I've always had a real interest in marketing and business development. And so it was kind of a natural fit for me. I had done a lot of writing, had books published already by that time. And then I transitioned into working as a consultant in patient experience. It's what I did my master's thesis on, and I was kind of on the bleeding edge of that patient experience. I mean, at the time, it was my first book was Customer Service in Healthcare, a Grassroots Approach to Creating a Culture of Service Excellence. I'm known
Customer
for my
service.
long
Nah,
subtitles.
nobody cares about that.
And back then, honestly, people were looking at me like I had two heads, like customer service in healthcare. So we've done a lot of changes as an industry. But as I started this business, it evolved from me thinking I could go in and consult to, hey, wait a minute, despite the fact that every hospital in America has tons of data on patient satisfaction scores or patient experience scores, it doesn't necessarily mean they believe it, right? And so that inspired me to start a mystery shopping division so that we could go in and really do a pulse check on what's really happening, give people a slice of the current reality. So when I describe my company, I say, think of us as a magnifying glass, a mirror, and a map. And with the magnifying glass, that's the mystery shopping and the culture assessment. We're going to dig deep, really look at your culture, see what's keeping you from making the progress that you want. We're going to hold up the mirror and say, look, this is what you really look like to your stakeholders. Here are some of the gaps that are keeping you from making progress with your culture and patient experience. And then we co-create the roadmap to get them from where they are to really where they want to be. So with that comes a lot of leadership development, frontline staff training, helping them identify what are the elements of the culture that really need to be changed.
That makes a lot of sense. And, I was giggling with you a moment ago. It's, the idea of patient experience. I remember doctors not very long ago would say, I don't care if they like me. I just get them better. It's like, well, it's a little more complicated than that. So today, when we talked about, getting back together to do a podcast, we had talked about various different aspects of all this. And then the leadership part is something we really haven't covered on our podcast, at least not since I can remember. It's a very important topic, and we just haven't talked about it a lot. So I thought, that would be an interesting topic, particularly since you created a course. And so, healthcare, if you're in healthcare, you believe everything is different in healthcare, and to a large degree it is. But like, what are some of the common leadership challenges that you address that, that are common to healthcare that maybe others might miss? What are some of those real tangible issues that come up?
Oh, definitely, communication, culture, hiring, managing difficult situations, helping your team become and stay engaged, retaining them, so those are some of the things we address, but it's not only the what, it's the how that makes it unique. And I say that because if you think about the title, Be the Leader Nobody Wants to Leave, okay, turnover is so high and so costly for organizations. Right now, a new report from NSI came out, and it said the updated report said it's 61,000 to replace an RN. And when you look at the turnover, it's costly. So we got to do that, you know. So the reason, the why is people leave their bosses, not their organizations. You've probably heard that a million times. But the how is how people learn and retain information is really important. And when I think about adult learners, oftentimes when people introduce training in their organization, it's transactional, not transformational. And so often they're checking a box, you know. Whereas to really make change and to really retain your staff, that leadership development really needs to be transformational.
So how do you do that? Because, I think of today, we're all busy. Well, most of us are busy anyway. So, and it's really easy. I remember once I heard a sales trainer way back said, "Hey," to this frustrated salesperson, "you're just a part of the passing parade of their life." And that's kind of frustrating when you think about it. You think like you have their rapt attention and they're really focused on what it is you're trying to convince them to do. And in your case, you're trying to convince or train them on what they should do. And then the next minute they're on a different call, completely different topic. How do you keep them engaged so they remember any of it versus,
Yeah.
"Oh, I like Kris. I remember something out about it. I'm not sure what." How do you do that?
Well, there's an art and a science to it. And being raised by educators in my household, when we played school, we had the real deal. I mean, I had the teacher's guide to everything. So I was looking at learning objectives and how to do these activities and things like that. And so when we created the course, we really decided it had to be transformational, not transactional, which is, you're absolutely right. People are really busy. Transactional would be, okay, I'm going to watch this video and check that it's done. Transformational is really about more hands-on application because adult learners want to know what's in it for me. How is this going to make my life better, easier? How is it going to help? So, having hands-on application, giving them a chance to brainstorm or ask questions, problem solve, reflect. So using hands-on assignments, they're going to watch videos, of course, but then they're going to give something that they have to try out, right? And then we come together and we have a group discussion, and then they have private coaching. So it's that cycle of learning something, trying it out, talking about it, getting feedback. That's how you create real world readiness for them.
That makes sense. So I'm glad to hear you have a coaching element in that because it's one thing to watch a course and it's another to have, follow-up coaching to apply it to me. Like, yeah, but how do I do this? And I'm assuming that happens a lot. Is that generally a critical part of your program or is it, I'm assuming it is, but I don't know.
It is, and both the group coaching and the private coaching has been very helpful for the leaders who take the course. In the groups, I often get feedback that, wow, it's so good to hear somebody else talk about they're having the same issue. And when I heard you coach them through that problem, it made a lot of sense and it gave me ideas of what I should do next, right? So sometimes they aren't the one being coached, but they're observing it. And then other times it's a one-on-one.
So what are if a leader is losing a lot of people, right? More than the sort of average to be expected. What are the things you mentioned a couple things like culture or whatever, but are there some typical smoking guns when it comes to turnover? Okay, expand on that a
Oh,
little bit for me.
Absolutely. And a lot of organizations do employee engagement surveys. And so when they do the employee engagement surveys, you know, they're going to be able to identify where are the problem areas. So that's more of a leading indicator compared to the lagging indicator of this is the turnover they had last year, right?
Right.
And so, yes, believe me, senior leadership pays close attention in a healthy environment, right? In a healthy and accountable environment, that they're going to be paying close attention to that. And I say that because not every organization is healthy with a good culture that's going to work on retention.
So, are there any common blind spots that you see is it engagement, and and how do you increase engagement? Like, help me understand this.
Yeah. So let me approach this from kind of two angles. There's blind spots for the organization and there's blind spots for the individual leader, right? And one of the big blind spots that I see is that we keep talking about breaking down silos, but it's not really happening, right? That can be a huge blind spot for the organization, you know. And let me just give you a marketing example. There are so many times we go into an organization to work on patient experience, and I will ask, how is marketing going to be involved in this culture transformation? And they look at me like, why would we have marketing involved? And to a marketer, you chuckle because you're thinking it's all about,
Yeah.
the consumer experience, but we've created even more silos. Patient experience. Now that we have chief experience officers or experience managers, that's one more silo we've created. And so, patient experience is siloed again. So then leaders don't relate to the brand promise, right? And of course they're well versed in quality safety, but when we come to connecting the dots with service and preventing patient attrition, they're not as focused on that. And the blind spots for the individual leaders, I think the biggest blind spot that we see when we're coaching is seeing them make the transition from being an individual contributor. Like me, I was an RN at the bedside, right?
Right.
I was an individual contributor. And then the next day, one day, I was made a director. I skipped the supervisor and manager and went right to director. And leadership is a skill set, not a title, right? Huge blind spot for organizations. And I cannot begin to count for you how many people have been promoted because they're very good clinically or technically. And now they're a leader of sometimes 80, 90, 100 people, right? And so they haven't been adequately prepared. So that is a blind spot.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's funny, even in a much smaller way with our agency, if I bring somebody who's been a good technician to supervising a team of 3 or 4, that's a different world. And not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody is really set up for that. And you get into those things like, well, if it's what has to be done right, I'll just do it. It's faster for me to do it myself. And you've heard that like how many thousands of times. So that's certainly common. So turnover is a big problem in healthcare, but so is burnout. Like, how, like you mentioned engagement and leaders and, their team is burnt out all the time. It's going to be hard to be effective and hard to retain them. Like, how can you help leaders, deal with burnout as a real issue?
Yeah, and it's two-pronged for leaders. One is they have to be cognizant of their own burnout, right? Or tendency toward burnout, but then they also have to be cognizant of their staff and the potential for burnout. So one of the first most powerful prevention elements for burnout, for preventing burnout, is staying connected. Active listening, a leader actively listening to their people, rounding. And I know leaders hear about rounding all the time. I'm not talking about drive-bys, right? It's not about being seen, it's about seeing, right? And so really staying connected, active listening, doing rounding, doing stay interviews. And stay interviews are one of the most important things for a personalized retention plan, but they do a lot to prevent burnout too, because they can reveal a lot about what's going on in the organization. But the other thing that cannot be slighted is recognition. Helping people feel valued. I was just reading a post by a group of nurses where they were having a discussion about, look, I don't mind working the extra shifts. I don't mind doing this, and this. All I want is to feel valued, right? And so I think that recognition, a general sweeping, hey, thanks everybody, good job, okay, that's nice, but coming up and saying, Stewart, I want to thank you for staying and taking care of Mrs. Jones yesterday and talking to her family. I know your shift had ended and you were on your way out the door when you stopped to connect with them. And honestly, that is truly living our values of respect and dignity. So again, recognizing the individual and then tying it back to who we are as an organization.
Yeah, and it just has to be purposeful, I think. It's really hard. Again, we're all busy to make that a habit versus, and I'm still learning as a leader. I've been working on this actual issue more lately because, aren't you all happy anyway? Like, no, yeah, like we're all still humans. We need nurturing, especially for us in an agency environment where everybody is virtual. It's even harder. You have to be really purposeful and try to remember that. So like, and you also mentioned that you had strategies for helping to bridge communication gaps. What kinds of things are helpful there?
Well, communication is something that is woven throughout the course. I mean, from the very first module of hiring for fit, we're talking about the importance of good communication and, bridging gaps between, let's say, messaging that you're getting from administration and, hire somebody, get somebody in there, and saying we need to protect our values. So hiring for fit means you got to take the time to actually ask the questions that are behavior based. They're going to help you get at those. So teaching those communication skills really is woven throughout the entire course. One of the areas that we find is so important and so widely appreciated is on managing expectations. And somebody had said to me once, you don't realize you weren't clear on expectations until somebody fails to meet them, right? And I thought about that and I thought, oh my gosh, that is painfully true. And so we spend a lot of time talking about how do you manage expectations? And communication is huge in there. And that is where you find so many major communication gaps. What you think you said and what they actually heard, are two different things. So there are gaps. And so learning how to communicate more clearly and to validate what they heard and then to follow up to make sure that, they did understand that they're following through and things like that. And then, of course, back to coaching again. Coaching is all about communication.
Yeah, I would say another line I heard from somebody spacing on her name years ago is, how can you expect people to make expectations you've never set? Or how can you expect to make an expectation the client has never set? Like, you really have to be on the same page. And I think the fallacy is you tell somebody once in a meeting and you expect them to remember it. And that's one of my flaws. Like, we talked about this 6 months ago and we haven't now talked about it again. It's like people just don't retain well, especially in today's world. Everybody is ADD. You have to hit them with a message over and over and over again, simplistically, to hope for it to stick. And I've been in meetings where um, somebody's complaining about a lack of process, like, wait, you were part of that. You documented that. So it's like it's really easy for people to forget on stuff we've all agreed on. It really does need constant, at least in my experience, a lot of reinforcement. It's like talking about it once is not the same thing for sure. So, like um, the staff engagement and patient experience and outcomes, how do you connect all that together?
Yes, I mean, and there is strong evidence of those links between, staff engagement, patient experience, and clinical outcomes. There have been some really good studies that have done, you know, there transformational leadership is one area too that is so important in bridging that gap. Um, I was reading an article about nursing and talking about how in nursing, transformational leadership is so important because it helps people connect to purpose. It's all about relationships. It's about feeling heard. And then they can transfer that to other people. So when people feel cared about, they're more likely to care, right? To give care, to be caring. I like to think of it as, we all run a kind of emotional checking account, right? And you need to have deposits made in order to be able to give that emotional, capital away. And so as leaders, we've got to be really mindful about maintaining that. But Press Ganey did a really good study. I think they published it last year. They were analyzing like almost 2 million employees from over 500 location or organizations. And what they showed was when you measure staff engagement, those in the top 25% of employee engagement, the organizations who score in the top 25%, on average have 38 percentile, not just mean score, but percentile points on the patient's surveys indicating likelihood to recommend. I mean, and so, at the end of the day, as a marketer, that's the big question. How likely are you to recommend? And that is, that's really important. And so there's also, trust comes in there too, right? Patient trust happens as you forge a relationship, right? So the relationship builds trust, trust builds compliance, and compliance improves outcomes. And people are much more likely to listen to and comply with somebody that they like and who cares about them. That's the bottom line.
That totally makes sense. So, two more questions as we wrap up here. One was about just leadership behaviors you found have the strongest sort of ripple effect to employees and to engagement.
Yeah, I would say rounding that, and then not the drive-bys, but really interacting, rounding. The next one I would say is recognition, meaningful, personalized recognition. And when I talk about recognition, I talk about 3 Ps. It needs to be prompt, personal, and plentiful, right? And when people go in to measure just how often recognition is happening, it's not happening as much as it really should. And so you have to have systems in place to make that happen. So rounding, recognition, and one-on-one coaching are all really big.
So, I have to ask a bonus question here. I still have another question I want to ask at the end of this, but like when you have a sick organization where it's just like, their leapfrog score is suffering, they're not super safe, they've got a culture, and there may be, I would guess, like if you get into a place like that, people dismiss the other cultural issues that are inherent, but it all kind of ladders up to the same stuff. So when do you ever get engaged by where they just really have a lot of work to do? And then are there anything special that you can do to help, sort of triage that to get them onto a baseline?
Yeah, so we typically start with a culture assessment when we're working with organizations. And during that culture assessment, we are able to look at, okay, just how toxic is this that we're dealing with? And I pride myself in delivering the kind truth. And that means being able to say to that CEO privately, look, do you want to change this organization? Because this is going to be hard work. And this is what your role has to be. And there have been times where I've needed to walk away because I know that they are not going to be willing to do the work, right?
Yeah.
And that can be tough because you look around and you think, oh my gosh, on the front line, they have these wonderful people that are so dedicated. They just don't have the support, right?
Yeah. Well, I could see that. I mean, like I said, there are some organizations that are healthier than others. I think some organizations, view themselves differently. Like I remember that Dr. Jim Molino has been a friend and guest on this podcast a lot. As you know, he's a leader in patient experience. And when he went over to the private sector with Press Ganey, I said, "What is the thing that surprised you most?" He said, "How many times the safety is not even in the question? Like they're not even, that's not even on the topic, right? Like that's sort of fundamental." And so, some organizations I'm sure have a much longer way to go, and some organizations, for example, view themselves as protectors of health in their communities. Some view themselves as leaders and innovators, but others really don't have that. And so it's I can see it being challenging. As we wrap up, we talked about marketing just a little bit. What is anything else on the strong connection between leadership, or the connection between strong leadership and marketing? Anything you can expand on there?
Yeah, a favorite topic of mine, actually, because if a brand is a promise, then the question is, how are you delivering on that promise at every encounter with every customer every single day? So, think about how marketing in organizations works tirelessly to bring in business to the organization, to acquire new patients. Think about the cost of patient acquisition. And when that consumer becomes a patient, there are multiple touch points where the patient is deciding if you are what you say you are, right? And what are you saying you are? You put out your mission, your vision, your values, your tagline, right? And nobody's putting an asterisk or a footnote on the mission saying, we put the patient at the center of all we do, asterisk, look at the footnote that says, except for when we're busy or having a bad day, and God help you on the weekends and holidays, right? So
Yeah.
nobody's putting that footnote in. And so having leaders really embrace that. They're the ones who are the keepers of the culture. They're the ones who are helping deliver on the brand promise at every touch point.
Yeah.
Are the behaviors aligned? Does the staff know what's expected of them? Have the staff been coached? Are they tolerating bad behaviors that don't align with the promise? Because what you permit, you promote.
Yep. So it's funny. A couple thoughts on this. So I recently interviewed Doug Flora and Dr. Doug Flora. He was talking about how it is hospital to look at marketing as part of the cancer fighting team. Like they really do look at it that way. Like
That's
as
good.
opposed to being sitting at the kids' table or not even in the room at all. right? They're not like, they're go get your lunch is on your own, go to the school cafeteria. So I think marketing, historically, and it's a little better now, but has always been at the king's table in many organizations, and it's tough. And we're marketing not just to attract patients today. We're marketing to our own constituencies, right? Our own doctors, our referrers, our donors, our employees, and people forget that. And clearly, if we're talking about a brand promise and culture extending all the way through, is important. We are working on currently. We're just engaged with a group that has provider groups and an IPA and a bunch of different entities. And there's some challenges in there because some are unknown, others were known and aren't as much of today. So there's always thinking through like, how does this stuff all fit together and how do we align on a brand promise and how do we live that, right? It's not just lip service, but how do we actually live it? So I think it's an important topic. Anyway, Kris, any final thoughts before I let you go? This was awesome, as I expected it would be. Anything else?
I mean, just that if people are interested in learning more about Be the Leader Nobody Wants to Leave, they can always find more information on my website, baird-group.com. And we start new cohorts every 9 weeks for that course. But then we also offer it to organizations so that they can have private cohorts as well.
That's awesome. Well, Kris, it was fun. I will see you in Orlando in a few weeks here.
Yeah, that's great. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, we'll see you there. Nice seeing you again. Have a great day. Thanks.
Thank you.